IVM.
So Satyajit, how are you feeling today?
Great. I feel great. I always feel great in the studio, you know. It's a great time when we're here, we meet.
But great or like today is special?
Today is special because we're recording in the studio. And every time we record is special, so...
But did you ever thought that 13 would actually become maybe double of it?
What, 13?
Or like 3 times of it?
13?
Yeah, the 13 number that we had decided.
Oh, what are you talking about?
So, today is our 50th recording and it's super overwhelming because we've come so far. And do you remember we used to like talk about 13 episodes is something we should try. If we could do it would be amazing. And today we are at our 50th episode. So,
oh wow, I didn't realize that we were recording our 50th episode.
Yeah, and we've met
That's a huge landmark. Congratulations, Raachyeta.
Congratulations to you too.
And congratulations to Paperback and all our listeners.
And IVM podcast.
Yes. So our 50th episode, I am really excited because our guest today, I don't know if this is by design or by destiny, but our guest today is renowned best-selling author Ashwin Sanghi. You know, you won't believe it, when we had actually conceptualized the podcast and, you know, we had made a list of authors we would potentially reach out to. Ashwin was one of those names that was, you know, that impossible dream guest that you'll get on your podcast.
Absolutely.
Maybe if you become successful one day.
Yeah.
And... it's unbelievable.
And he's one of the authors who like literally got us into reading and enjoying books and, you know, and a very different take on history. So I've always like looked up to him and it's so exciting that he's finally here in the studio.
I can't believe this is our 50th episode. So for all our listeners, this is a very special episode with a very special guest. And listen in, guys. The conversation was fantastic. I think this is the best episode we've done so far.
Yeah, and thank you all for your continued support and do keep listening to us. And there shall be many more great books to talk about.
Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project. I am your co-host Satyajit, otherwise known as Onion Knight in most food circles. I'm hosting this podcast with my co-founder at the Open Library Project, Raachyeta Sharma.
Hi guys, my name is Raachyeta. I'm an ex-banker, social impact entrepreneur, podcaster, writer, publisher, and inveterate learner. The Open Library Project is a curated library service which is offered to corporates on a subscription basis. The idea here is to create value, build a knowledge community, and encourage a growth mindset amongst our members.
Today we have with us on the show Ashwin Sanghi. Ashwin Sanghi ranks among India's highest-selling English fiction authors. He has written several bestsellers, The Rozabal Line, Chanakya's Chant, The Krishna Key, The Sialkot Saga, Keepers of the Kala Chakra, and 2 New York Times best-selling crime thrillers with James Patterson, Private India, sold in the US as City on Fire, and Private Delhi, sold in the US as Count to 10. Ashwin has been included by Forbes India in their Celebrity 100. He is a winner of the Crossword Popular Choice Award in 2012, Amazon India's Top 10 eBook 2018, Bangalore Litfest Popular Choice Awards 2018, WBR Iconic Achievers Award 2018, and the LitoFest Literature Legend Award 2018. Ashwin also mentors, co-writes and edits titles in the immensely popular 13 Steps series. Welcome to the show, Ashwin, and it's an honor to have you here. Honestly, personally speaking, you're one of my favorite authors in this genre, and in fact, Krishna Key is a book that I've not only read multiple times, but it's a book that I've bought at least 6 or 7 times just because...
I am delighted to be here with you, Satyajit, as well as Raachyeta. Thank you for inviting me. And I am actually also honored to be in the presence of the Onion Knight. So maybe...
I'm blushing.
Maybe in this, at the end of this event, this event will end with an investiture of sorts.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. So Ashwin, before we get into your books and let's talk about how you actually got into writing, because you come from a business family and you know, let's hear it from you. Like,
well, I mean, my background is an entirely business one.
Right.
I grew up. My father is a Marwadi. My mother is a Banya. So I mean, potent combination. And you grew up in an environment where the two most important words in your vocabulary were debit and credit.
Right.
And so that was always built inside me. But the one thing that was going on in parallel with my business training, and the business training actually in all, Marwadi family starts very young.
Yeah.
Right.
So I used to go into my father's place of work even at age 12.
Okay.
And one of the things that used to happen in parallel with that was actually my maternal granduncle, who lived in Kanpur, had a huge library and used to share a book every week with me to read. And of course, in the initial days when I was still very, very small, I was not that excited about reading those books, but I was very interested in having one additional book on my shelf.
Right.
But the old man wisened up eventually, and he said, "You're not reading." So he said, "Now if you want another book next week, you'll send me a letter first telling me what you read and what you liked and what you didn't like."
Nice.
So it was the earliest form of really a book review.
Right.
And that went on for many, many years. Even when I went away for my MBA to the US, Nanaji's books used to follow me.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So that was happening in parallel. When I would go to work in order to learn accounting from my Munimji, he would always stare at whatever book I happened to be holding, and he would say that, this is really not going to get you anything.
Okay.
I mean, bookkeeping is more important than book reading. And if you must read, then read a balance sheet. I mean, why are you wasting your time with this?
Right.
Yeah.
I
never really got that though, how people really read a balance sheet, they spend hours reading
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
And so I would go back to Nanaji with this, query that, this is what Munimji is saying. Nanaji used to say that, listen, you're in a business family, so the worship of Lakshmi is going to come naturally to you.
Right.
But there is a very unique relationship between Lakshmi and Saraswati, which is that Lakshmi actually wants to be wherever Saraswati is.
Right.
She's very curious, innately curious and jealous in some ways.
Okay.
And so if Saraswati gets up to leave, then Lakshmi also gets up.
Oh, wow. What a amazing thought.
Yeah.
So he said, if you really want Lakshmi in your life, then the best way of getting her is Saraswati.
Wow.
Right.
And so he said, don't give up on the Saraswati factor. And of course, in Hindu mythology, the only deity who can sit between these two goddesses, as it were, is Ganeshji, which probably explains the physical form of Ashwin Sanghi, who looks a bit of a Ganesh himself. So, I mean, the point is that, I had these two parallel streams going on. There was the business side and there was the literary side.
Right.
But I never thought that I would ever become a writer.
Right.
That was much later. I went through my training, I went through my education, came back after having earned an MBA in finance, no less, and worked for several years as an ordinary businessman, not sort of making sure that I worked 16 hours a day.
Right.
And then an incident occurred where I was called away for a business trip. I happened to be in Srinagar.
Okay.
And that particular trip led to the Rozabal Line.
Okay. So how? So before this point, you had never considered writing as a career, or were you writing as a hobby? Or
I wrote a few articles, but I think the problem was really, Satyajit, that I was expected to be Ashwin Sanghi.
Right.
And Ashwin Sanghi's avatar at that time was a business avatar. So I was expected to write articles on the state of our market or the state of the economy, or I contributed articles of that nature. The liberation that I needed to feel while writing was never there.
Okay.
And I felt in some ways very inhibited because there was stuff that I wanted to write about, but it just sounded weird that it would be coming from Ashwin Sanghi.
Right.
And I think the Rozabal Line was my voyage of discovery in that sense. And probably that's also the reason why that first book was written under a pseudonym.
Right.
Yeah.
So the
And that's actually quite interesting that, you published it yourself and you wrote it in a pseudonym, and then you were approached to actually publish it through
Westland.
Westland, right. So there's a very, very strong essence of, mythology that runs through a lot of your books. And is there a reason why? Maybe is it the Saraswati and Lakshmi in your life that, sort of encouraged you to write about mythology-related fiction? Or...
I reached there actually, Raachyeta, by accident, pure accident.
It sounds like a fascinating story.
Yeah, because when I went to Srinagar, this was at the peak of the shutdown, as it were. Well, we've had a bigger shutdown after that, but that was peak terrorism, really.
Yeah,
and I was in a situation where I had to attend a particular wedding of a dear family friend. I was staying at what then used to be known as the Oberoi Palace Hotel. Now I think it's called the Lalit. More than 70% of the hotel was shut down, shuttered up, and only one wing of the hotel was functioning. And even those rooms were mostly lying vacant. When I walked down the corridors, I could hear my own footsteps. So it was that lonely.
Wow.
And I would have driven myself insane. But I told the driver, I said, listen, I don't care what the curfews are. I don't care what the roadblocks are. We need to get out of the hotel. I mean, I just need some normalcy.
Yeah.
So we got out and he said, where do you want to go? I said, just take me to some exciting or fascinating place. Anything that you think is good. He said, Saab, agar aap chahein to Hazrat Bal chalte hain. I said, I've been to Hazrat Bal. He said, we'll go to Chashma Shahi. I said, no, I've already been there. By the end of it, he said, have you been to the Shankaracharya Mandir? I said, yes, I've been there. So by the end of it, he took me to this little tomb in the heart of Srinagar in an area which is known as the Kanyar district. It's really the heart of old Srinagar.
Okay.
And there is a little tomb out there, which is a squarish tomb. It has supposedly stood there from 124 AD.
Oh, wow.
So apparently it's around 2000 odd years old. Property records indicate that it's very old. And it's very, very simple, an unassuming structure which you would not imagine that there is anything of import in that.
Right.
We walked in and there is a tomb out there of a Muslim saint. His name is Nasiruddin, Pir from the 13th century.
Okay.
And of course, that is an Islamic burial with the head pointing towards Mecca. But underneath the body of Nasiruddin is an earlier burial, which goes back to the origin of the tomb. And that, of course, is an east-west burial because it predates the advent of Islam. The Prophet Muhammad is 632.
Right.
So, 500 years prior to that. And the burial is an east-west direction, which on face of it indicates that it's an ancient Jewish burial because of the axis. Outside the tomb is a metallic plate which shows a pair of human feet with little marks indicating the points at which the nails for a crucifixion would have been hammered in. And the common folklore around that place is that Jesus actually did survive the crucifixion and that he traveled to India, which he saw as his spiritual home. And that he came and settled down in Kashmir and that he was finally buried there.
Right.
And there are, I've always had this running joke along with my dear friend Amish Tripathi that do we go looking for stories or do stories come looking for us? And this was one of those things where the story just came.
It found you.
It found me. I spent the next 1 year or so for looking for stuff. Whether it was talking to people, reaching people long distance on, calls, reading books, finding archaic papers. And it wasn't with the intention of writing a book. It was just to find out about
just get the knowledge. It was so interesting that you needed to know everything about it. Yeah.
And a year and a half later, my wife, one day when we were sitting together, she said, Ashwin, you've become an utter bore. It's impossible to have a conversation with you without you bringing up the tomb.
Right.
And she said, I think you need to find a way to get this out of your system. So I started writing a paper. It was meant to be a non-fiction document, almost a thesis, you could say.
Okay.
I had found multiple threads of this story in various ways. For example, there was a Russian explorer called Nicholas Notovich who came to India in 1887 and went to Ladakh, where he was injured and he had to spend a long time there. He had conversations with the Lama where they found that there was a manuscript, a very ancient manuscript, which indicated that a young boy at the age of 12 had come from Palestine to study under the Buddhist masters, and that his name was Isa.
Okay.
So there were multiple strands of which were connecting up to one particular story.
Right.
And I wanted to bring these together. And in the process, what ended up happening was that I wrote this 40-page document with all the research that I had done. And I gave it to my wife and I said, read it and tell me what you think. And she read it. And the next morning she said, congratulations. And I was very happy because I said, okay, that means we've, got off to a good start.
Right.
She said, no, congratulations, because I think you've discovered the cure to insomnia, because a couple of pages down and I was out for the count. So she said, it's so utterly boring. Who's going to read this?
Right.
And that's the time I realized that, I'd not wasted my time, because that 1 year I had become probably one of the most knowledgeable people in that space.
Right.
And that's the time that I started writing it up as a novel.
Okay.
And that's how the Rozabal Line was born.
Fantastic.
That's so interesting.
It sounds like, it definitely sounds like the story found you, this first
Absolutely.
one. Absolutely. So how was the writing process for you the first time? I mean, you're a businessman who's not been writing in long format, right? Like a book is a huge commitment.
Of course.
Did you have any idea how many words it takes to go into a book?
Not at all. And frankly, the Rozabal Line was a labor of love. The story was within me, but I had not yet attempted anything as big as that.
Right.
Yeah.
And as a result of which I ended up tying myself into knots. I approached the story in a very unstructured way. People who read the Rozabal Line and really love the Rozabal Line, they probably love it for the fact that it has that element of abandon and rawness to it.
Right.
But frankly, if that had been my fourth book or my fifth book, probably it would have been written very, very differently.
Right. So that's a very interesting thought, actually, because do you feel like your writing style has kind of evolved over at least with your fiction books? Do you think it's kind of changed over the amount of books that you've done?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, by the time that I went into writing Chanakya's Chant, which was the second book, by that time I had already become far more organized.
Okay.
Right.
So Chanakya's Chant, I actually knew that there were going to be two parallel stories. One was set in the ancient times and one in new. I also knew that they had to reflect the parallels. Both the tracks had to reflect the parallels in those stories.
Yeah.
So those were already a part of my overall planning process.
Right.
Even though I wrote the ancient story separately and I wrote the modern story separately, and then I simply spliced them
Together
into alternating chapters of modern and ancient.
Right.
Yeah.
But in other words, there was a structure to the writing process.
Right.
By the time I went into the Krishna key, my research process had evolved. So I was entirely focused on having every bit of that story fully plotted out. In fact, I not only had read things like, for example, the Kalki Puran, the Mahabharata, and the Bhagavad Gita, and several of the Purans also. And in addition to that, I'd visited Dwarka, Bet Dwarka, Mathura, Vrindavan.
Wow.
All of those places I'd already
research.
Yeah. So in that sense, I wasn't dependent upon secondary sources in certain ways.
Right.
The greatest amount of planning actually went into the book, the Sialkot Saga, because that was structured as literally every chapter had been summarized down to about 150 odd words. And so the starting of every chapter, the ending of every chapter, the age of the characters in that chapter, and the dimension of that character which had to come across in that particular space was already plotted out.
Right.
It was my longest book, 150,000 words. So, but I think over a period of time, I've become a far more organized, methodical, systematic sort of person.
Right.
Yeah,
There are those who
like...
read my later works and compare it to the Rozabal Line and say, why can't you write another Rozabal Line? But that was a different Ashwin Sanghi. And today's Ashwin Sanghi is different.
And How was your experience, writing with James Patterson? And, it's been a long journey from, your first book till it actually came out. So how was that as an experience?
Well, James is, he is a broad brushstroke sort of person. And he has made collaborations into an art form.
Okay.
He works with multiple authors around the world.
Right.
And of course, as a result of that, he is prolific. On an average, I think every year you would have anywhere between 10 and 15 James Patterson books coming out.
Right.
Of which probably a few are his own, but for the better part, they are co-authored books.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the great advantage of working with someone like James is that he is truly a master of the thriller. The thriller he understands completely, because very few people understand what is it that causes a thrill. They know about the term thriller, but they don't know what it takes to create a thrill.
And especially when you're writing, right? Because
Absolutely.
when you're watching something, there are
It's a different
medium,
various experiences that
Exactly.
allow it, the sound
Exactly.
and the music. And
Exactly. So with James, what I found was basically that when you work in a collaborative process with him, he is one of those people who will force you to be almost minimalistic in your approach. So if you can convey something in the form of one sentence, then you don't need a paragraph to say it.
Right.
Whereas I am at the opposite end of the spectrum. I love the descriptive prose. I love building up the atmosphere of a particular chapter.
Yeah.
And I think that combination of my intense research, along with a very, wanting to be a little more elaborate in my way of telling the story, combined with James's minimalism and attention to the ultimate objective, which is to create a thrill.
Yeah.
I think that was a perfect combination.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a fan of James Patterson as well. Because,
It sounds like a perfect blend.
It's just, even Private Delhi, I think, is a fantastic book. In fact, I just... Krishna, I keep coming back to Krishna Ki because, I kind of found that book in my cousin's house. And I picked it up. I just saw the cover. It seemed interesting. So I said, let me read the back and let me read a couple of pages. And so I read it and then I couldn't put it down. So I kind of stole it from my cousin's house, got it back. I was in Bangalore, so I got it back to my house in Bombay. And then proceeding, I've gifted it to so many of my friends also. The reason is because it's so well researched.
Yeah.
Is that after you read the story, you go back and you're like, oh, wait a second, is this true? Is this also true? Is this also true? So that is fascinating. And
I think that's the point. For me, every book which I write within the Bharat series at least, I see it as sort of the first step in a journey.
Yeah.
So I believe that the story has worked if it prompts you to go back, flip back to the end of the book and to look at some of the sources and say, oh, now this is a book which I would like to read, or this is a paper that I would like to be able to procure in order to read.
Yeah.
Because with most of my books, the reason I am so emphatic about providing sources is because I don't want you to feel that I have simply crafted a fictional story.
Right.
It's a fictional story which is based on a bedrock of research.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes the research may have alternative views. So, for example, in the context of the anthropology involved in the Krishna Ki, there is the context of whether you consider that it was the Saraswati civilization which resulted in an outward migration from India, or do you consider it to be an Indus Valley civilization which was overrun by foreign migrants or invaders? So in the Krishna Ki, I will present to you at the back in the references, I'll give you both the points of view.
Right.
And then it's pretty much your conscious decision to decide which works better for you.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, you've brought out a beautiful point. I totally love this about your books, that it gives you another take on mythology. So you're interested So like if somebody asked me to just pick up the Mahabharata and read it, I would probably not be that inclined to do it.
Yes.
But because there is this fiction attached to a lot of, factual points, you're very, very intrigued to look at it from a different perspective, which is excellent.
I agree with you, Raachyeta. The problem that we are having really is that we've got a generation that has grown up without grandmothers and grandfathers in their homes who used to tell them stories.
Yeah.
Whereas that was a very normal part of our growing up years.
Absolutely.
And to a very great extent, this generation, which is now emerging, wants a little more... They want a logical explanation for a lot of things.
True. Right.
So, for example, when my grandfather used to tell me a story about levitating sadhus, I really used to wonder as to whether the old man was smoking weed. But today now, when I look back at some of the research that has been done, for example, at Oxford University, actually we are finding that there are scientific reasons as to why levitation could actually occur and could be explained. Now, when you combine those two things, then it makes for an interesting read.
Absolutely.
So, in that sense, when people say, oh, Ashwin Sanghi is a mythology guy or he's a historical fiction guy, the truth is that the only thing that I am is the overlap guy. What interests me is the overlap between history and myth. What interests me is the overlap between, let's say, spirituality and science. The overlap between the political climate of today versus the political climate of 3,500 years ago. So wherever there are linkages, that is what fascinates me.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. And, just the fact that history in itself, like we've discussed this on so many podcasts, is what, the victor decides it to be. So when you get another perspective on it, which is researched, it is definitely very intriguing and you want to find out more about it.
Well, to a certain extent, history, you're right, is written by the victors. And the other part of it is, of course, that if you really think about it, we don't know whether history is real or not. In that sense, when I was writing Chanakya's Chant, there is the Artha Shastra and the Niti Shastra, which has been authored by someone which we consider to be Chanakya. But if you really look back at the life story of Chanakya, whatever we know in history is based on a Sanskrit play known as the Mudra Rakshas. The Mudra Rakshas was written 700 years after Chanakya died. And it was written to be performed on stage. What if Vishaka Datta, the author of the Mudra Rakshas, was that time's Ashwin Sanghi, was liberally mixing fact and fiction in order to create an interesting story? So what we consider to be history now could very well have been fiction. So in that sense, George Santayana said it beautifully. He said that, history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, written by people who were never there. So what... I think we owe it to ourselves that the generation that is growing up, they must have the ability to be able to discern that this is one version.
Right. So,
and there could be other versions.
Absolutely. So this is the underlying message that you want to give out through all your books is
absolutely
like go there and explore.
Absolutely. And don't take my word for it. So just because I present a certain perspective doesn't mean that my perspective is right.
On that note, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back after this.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Also like to thank Intel and Storytel for supporting us this month. Want to welcome a brand new show onto the network. It's called Peak Planet. It's hosted by research fellow and engineer Karthik Ganeshan. In every episode, Karthik discusses sustainability issues that affect Indians through evidence-backed information. In the first season, he dives deep into air pollution and the discourse around it. I think this is especially important given the situation across the country these days. On The Seen and the Unseen, Amit is joined by author and advocate Chitranshul Sinha. They talk about the historical background of the sedition law and discuss Chitranshul's book, The Great Depression. On The Origin of Things, Chuck narrates a story about a man who revolutionized the concept of fuel in Brazil through the Great Depression and World War II. On Edges and Sledges, the guys talk about the T20 match between India and Bangladesh. On Geek Fruit, Tejas and Dinkar are joined by the IVM producer Abbas. They talk about the new Terminator film Dark Fate and the past and future of the franchise. On Football Shitball, we have an exciting episode as our hosts discuss the aftermath of the biggest game this season, Liverpool versus Manchester City. It's a Children's Day special on IVM Lives as Madhuri, Alika, Rutika and Abbas talk about pop culture they consumed as children and reflect on how they perceive it now. On GabyCD, Sunetra and Farhad share the list of their first, from their first kiss to their first queer experience to the first time queer representation in art moved them. It's a list you definitely don't want to miss. On The Habit Coach, Ashlyn talks about measuring and visualizing the progress of our habits with the help of paper clips. On the season finale of Keeping It Queer, Naveen and Farhad discuss their understanding of a breakup and how to get over them with maturity. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
Welcome back, guys. We still have with us Ashwin Sanghi. Hey, Ashwin, that was a fantastic first half. I felt...
I enjoyed myself. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I feel like this nostalgia of all the books that, we've read over so many years. And we're finally talking to you, so it feels great.
And quite honestly, we've discussed this on other podcasts as well. Basically, I have never had an interest in history while growing up, through school or anything. But after I read Krishna Ki or even Chanakya's Chant, I was just compelled to know more about it. I just think it speaks
But that's because we teach history in such a boring way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The entire focus is, do you know what happened when?
Yeah.
And how does a particular palace or temple exist and what does it look like?
Right.
And what were the top 10 characteristics of Akbar the Great? I mean, it's so cut and dry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas at the end of the day, what history is a story. And I wish that, it was taught in a way where children didn't have to mug up dates and characteristics and places.
Right.
And instead they could sit in a classroom and they could be discussing, alternative views of that particular person. You take someone like a figure like Aurangzeb, such a divisive figure.
Yeah.
And today, of course, hundreds of years later, you still have politics going on around Aurangzeb.
Yeah.
But why can't that sort of a deep discussion, a deep dive into that person happen in the classroom?
That's where it should ideally be happening.
And that's where it should be happening,
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Great. So after you wrote many bestsellers in the crime fiction genre, you moved on to writing non-fiction, and you have a series of books, the 13 Steps series, which deals with various topics. So my question is, why did you kind of make the switch from fiction to non-fiction? Was it something that you felt like you wanted to express more around these thoughts, or was it...
by chance.
It was, first of all, let me put it this way. I did not switch because I continue to be a fiction writer at heart. And the most important series that I write is the Bharat Series, in which another book will come out in January.
Yes.
So, so there is tons and tons of... that is my passion.
Right.
Yeah.
But having said that, there was also a fear within me that to a certain extent I'm getting compartmentalized.
Okay.
And that is something which somehow or the other terrifies me.
Okay.
Right.
For someone to start calling me a mythological fiction writer or someone calling me a historical fiction writer, I think that's probably the reason why I wrote crime thrillers with Patterson. Because I said, okay, fine, at least I'm a crime thriller writer now.
Right.
And I think non-fiction was basically my way of saying, hey, listen, ultimately, even non-fiction is about telling a story.
Right.
Yeah.
The first book when it came out, which was 13 Steps to Bloody Good Luck, that was not, at that time when we wrote that book, it was not with the intention of making this into a series.
Okay.
I had experienced tons and tons of rejections at the time of the Rozabal Line.
Right.
And I was sitting, very depressed and forlorn at home. There was a family friend of ours who used to come and have a drink with my dad on the weekends. And he asked me, he said, Beta, why are you looking so depressed?
Right.
And I said that, Uncle, I've been rejected by the whole world in terms of publishers and literary agents. No one even wants to see my work. And he said, what's the problem? He said, in life, remember one thing, 99% is about luck. So I was in a bit of an argumentative mood. And I said, but what about the 1%?
Right.
That must be networking, hard work,
something.
Talent, efficiency, resources. And he picked up his drink, which was half full, and he said 99% is good luck. And then he drained his glass, and then he said 1% is known as bloody good luck. And I was wondering what is this man going on about?
Right.
But later on, I was asked this question at a literature festival down south by a young lady who said, what do you attribute your success to? And I said, and I honestly answered, luck.
Yeah.
And she followed me out of the auditorium and she said, but if it's all luck, then in that case, why don't I just simply sit at home in an air-conditioned room watching a plasma television with my favorite shows and wait for my luck to kick in?
Right.
Why do I need to do anything?
Yeah.
And my publisher was standing next to me and he started laughing. And he said, I think you need to explain yourself, Ashwin.
Okay.
And so it was not even meant to be a book. It was meant to be a little pamphlet.
Okay.
Which talked about why are lucky people, and I'm using the word advisedly within quotes, lucky is within quotes. Why are lucky people lucky?
Right.
And when I looked deeply into many, many people's lives, I realized that there was a lot going on in those lives and there were many, many dimensions to their character which actually made them luckier than others.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to explain that, and the first book was born. We had not expected that first book to do well. I was known as a fiction writer.
Right.
This was a non-fiction, self-help, motivational type title. But surprisingly, it went into multiple print runs. And at the end of the year, people started approaching me and saying that, listen, you've taken a concept which is considered to be very mysterious and you've actually demystified it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in the world of fiction, you go out trying to create a mysterious environment, whereas here you've actually done the opposite. You've demystified.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why can't you take other topics and demystify them? So why only talk about luck? Let's talk about wealth. Let's talk about health. Let's talk about, cooking. Let's talk about anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as it turns out, there were other people who were approaching me at that time.
Okay.
And that resulted in the second book, which was a wealth book, 13 Steps to Bloody Good Wealth. Then Dr. Batra came along and he said, let's write 13 Steps to Bloody Good Health. And there was a retired college professor who came along for 13 Steps to Bloody Good Marks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Kiran Mandral came along for 13 Steps to Bloody Good Parenting. So I realized that with all of these people, they had a vertical domain knowledge. They had an expertise on that subject.
Yeah.
Right.
What probably I needed to bring to the table was simply the storytelling skill.
Right.
That how do you make that book, a page turner?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what that combination is. So it's again a collaborative model. Other than the first book, I did not actually sit down to write any one of them. All those others have been written by co-writers. The research came from the co-writer. What I have brought is my style of telling that story.
Fantastic. Yeah. I think non-fiction does best when it's in a narrative storytelling style. And so we discuss usually only non-fiction books on the podcast, and the best books, the ones that we remember the most, are the ones that have told stories that have connected at the basis level, like from the Elon Musk book to the Jack Ma book to, the book on happiness, like How of Happiness or The Myth of Happiness.
Sure.
So it's just the the common things that you kind of relate to in your life and in the what's being said in the book. So
of course,
non-fiction as a genre for us has been, people always ask us, why are you all only non-fiction? Why don't you all talk about fiction as well? But the reason that we do non-fiction so prolifically is that we find it can really help you relate directly to things that have happened.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if you are able to look beyond, like if you get a good non-fiction book which is kind of narrative and storytelling, it kind of helps you implement the things also that are being talked about in the book, right?
Okay.
So that's the...
No, but I think that's a very valid point. And I think, unfortunately, what happens is with a large number of non-fiction books, they get so completely bogged down in trying to convey information.
Right.
Yeah.
And they forget that the shortest distance between two people is a story.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, if you can just take all of that and make it into a bloody good story, that makes for wonderful reading.
That's exactly what you've done with mythology and history as well, right? So you've taken, very technical and very theoretical knowledge, and you've just said, tied it down and made it a beautiful story. So
I've tried.
Yeah.
You've definitely succeeded.
So do you feel really, fresh and ready to write again, or does it add a lot of clarity? Because,
for
you
me, I
moved
go
out
through
of
phases.
a subject.
I go through phases, Raachyeta, because when I'm writing a Bharat Series book, typically it's about a 2-year project.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've done 5 books till now in a period of 10 years. So it's about an average of 2 years a book.
Okay.
Of which the first 8 months to 12 months is entirely spent on research. Another 2 to 3 months is spent on plotting.
Yeah.
Another 6 to 8 months is spent on writing. And then finally the last 2-3 months is spent on editing.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's typically around 2 years. Once I've finished writing a book, then typically the next 3 months to 6 months, I don't think of another story at that point of time, because I'm entirely focused on marketing.
Right.
Okay.
And that's the old Banya in me, which emerges at that point of time, that, how do I make sure that the largest possible number of people will actually read this book?
Yeah.
So now, while all of that is going on, very often between Bharat Series books, I end up taking other projects. So, for example, the 6th book in the Bharat Series has been written over the last 2 years. But during that time, also another 2 or 3 titles within the 13-step series came out.
Right.
Right.
So I don't consider that, whenever I find that my attention span is flagging, I move to, I do multitasking while I'm, but I define my the distance traveled according to every Bharat Series book.
Okay.
Okay. And do you feel that, if you research really well on a topic, it prevents any kind of writer's block, and it actually helps you tell the story better?
I think it's not only about research, it's also about planning your story. I mean, you wouldn't plan to walk by foot from Bombay to Delhi without having a roadmap in front of you.
Yeah.
It would be a foolish undertaking, not knowing which direction you're walking.
Right.
I think unlike literary fiction, where I think it's all about building up the emotion, the sentiment, the tapestry of words, I think with genre fiction, which is the space that I'm in, it's all about being able to tell the story, and getting that story right from day one is very critical. So I think if you've planned yourself very well in terms of having the skeleton, having the plot outline, having the character sketches, having all the required corresponding research duly mapped out and tabulated, at the time when you start writing, you'll find that you'll rarely have writer's block.
Right.
I mean, I don't ever face writer's block. I do face blocks, but it's at the time when I'm ideating or when I'm researching or when I'm plotting.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the time when I may have blocks, but not when I'm writing. Never when I'm writing.
Fantastic. And before we end the show, I just have one more question for you. So you were from a business family and you got into a creative sort of career. So any advice for people in business families who want to pursue creative careers, how to kind of go about it? Because, we in Bombay especially, when you're from a business family, doing something creative is kind of frowned upon. So maybe how to deal with that sort of inside your own family, and how to kind of...
I think the best way of really thinking about this is that, and I genuinely feel, just think about it at 3 levels.
Right.
Okay. Level 1, you're a lucky person in life if you get to do what you really like doing. Because then it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At a level 2, I would say you're a little luckier if you get to do what you like doing, but you're also good at it.
Okay.
So I think that's probably, I would say, the second step. And the third step probably is that you're a lucky person if you get to do what you like doing, you're also good at it, and then there is someone who's willing to pay you for it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Because then in that case, you've actually now not just got a passion, but you've also got a profession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's bloody good luck.
Yeah, that's bloody good luck. Now, for some people, that may not happen, which means that then it has to remain in the nature of a hobby or a passion rather than the nature of a profession. Because ultimately, let me tell you, as a writer, it's very difficult to write when you're hungry. So, I mean, it is important to make sure that you have a steady source of income to be able to even indulge a passion.
Yeah.
So if you're truly lucky in life, then that passion itself becomes your source of income.
Right.
But there will be some people for whom that will not be the case. But in which case, then probably they need to figure out that work balance so that they have some source of income and they can also indulge their passion.
Right. Fantastic.
Yeah,
and Ashwin, you mentioned your book is coming out in Jan. So where will it be available when it does come out?
January, the book will come out probably towards the end of the month.
Okay.
Most of the Bharat Series books have always been January releases. Okay. And once, of course, it comes out, it would be available in all the major bookstores. It will be available in online. Of course, prior to that, there will be, of course, the usual
book launches
and book tours, etc. So I'll be happy to meet whoever happens to be at that particular city or town or event that is happening.
Great.
And we would love to have you on the show again once the book is out.
The book is out. But it was fantastic having you. We had such a enlightening conversation about, just having a conversation with such an amazing author is
our privilege.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you, Satyajit. I enjoyed talking with you and with Raachyeta. And frankly, sometimes conversations tend to be stilted on account of the fact that, I've been in so many situations where someone was asking me all the wrong questions.
Right.
And then, I developed a habit where I would say, that's a great question. But I think that the real question that you need to consider is the following. Right. And then I would proceed to answer my own question.
Right. That's a great interviewing tactic.
I never had to do it even once with you guys. So thank you so much.
Wow. Awesome.
Thank you. We're honored.
Yeah. And a big thank you to all our listeners. You can follow the Open Library Project on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook for latest updates on our events. And stay tuned for the next Paperback podcast on IVM Podcasts. Happy reading. You can follow IVM Podcasts on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at IVM Podcasts. Listen to Paperback on the IVM Podcast app, website or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Are you looking for India's most awesome cricket podcast? Are you now tired of listening to the same old guys drone on about cricket everywhere? Edges and Sledges is a weekly cricket podcast hosted by 3 fans of the game, Varun, DJ, and myself, Ashwin. It was established in early 2018, has over 60 episodes now, and is of course now proud to be on the IVM Podcast Network. Each week, we get together from 3 different time zones, the USA, the UK, and Singapore, and we talk about things from the world of cricket, with a focus on Indian cricket. We often interview special guests from all around the world, including former cricketers and cricket media personalities. So check out Edges and Sledges, the cricket podcast, now on the IVM network.
Did you know that Parsis in Mumbai, instead of being left at the Tower of Silence after they die, are now cremated? And why? Because a cow fell sick in the early 1990s. Did you know that the smog in Delhi is caused by something that farmers in Punjab do and that there's no way to stop them? Did you know that there wasn't one gas tragedy in Bhopal, but 3? One of them was seen, but 2 were unseen. Did you know that many well-intentioned government policies hurt the people they're supposed to help? Why was demonetization a bad idea? How should GST have been implemented? Why are all our politicians so corrupt when not all of them are bad people? I'm Amit Verma, and in my weekly podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, I take a shot at answering all these questions and many more. I aim to go beyond the scene and show you the unseen effects of public policy and private action. I speak to experts on economics, political philosophy, cognitive neuroscience, and constitutional law so that the insights can blow not only my mind, but also yours. The Seen and the Unseen releases every Monday. So do check out the archives and follow the show at seenunseen.in. You can also subscribe to The Seen and the Unseen on whatever podcast app you happen to prefer.